Hello, everyone. Andi Petrillo with you. Well, the day has finally arrived. We now know how many games will be hosted in the three different countries that will be hosting the FIFA 2026 World Cup. We know it's across three nations, the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Our Kristian Jack in New York for the big announcement. Kristian, let's begin with the Canadian cities. What do you make of how the games were distributed between them?
Well, not a great deal of surprises here, but I will say being in the media room as the venues were announced, there was a great murmur amongst the United States press that certainly the capital here, Washington, D.C. and the Baltimore, Maryland area didn't get certainly a number of games that they certainly thought they were going to get. You know, I think they'll join Ottawa of our own country, of course, and Tokyo has been the major capitals to never host a game in a World Cup final. So that's a bit of a surprise. Other than that, not too much of a surprise in terms of the venue selected. Obviously, Rose Bowl didn't get selected. We didn't expect that to be. There's a lot of new venues, certainly in the United States, that have been built since 1994. I think the other major surprise was it just started to feel real. You know, so many media members here, players, Jonathan Azoro here from Toronto FC and Christian Pulisic from Chelsea, Chucky Lozano, many of them all saying the same thing. You know, it's one thing 4 years ago to be given it. It's another thing 4 years later to start mapping it out and seeing where those games are going to be played. So I think above all anything else, that was certainly the big takeaway here in New York City, that this is real now. 2026 after 2022 is going to happen, and we now know where those games will be played.
KJ, we know three Canadian cities were in the running: Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton. Edmonton doesn't get any games. This even after a remarkable display in November for the World Cup qualifiers, the Canadian men there beating Costa Rica, beating Mexico. So what happened? Why didn't they get any games?
Well, I mean, I think Edmonton is obviously a major story here. We knew that they were in the running. I think probably 6 months ago, it was almost a slam dunk they were going to get games. Vancouver entering the process has certainly, I think, changed that. You know, speaking to a number of people, I think certainly the conditions laid out by Alberta made it very difficult, a bit more tougher to accept than some of the other conditions that weren't necessarily out there in other cities. The other thing I would say that is crucial about this bid that not too many people are talking about is these pods of cities that have been announced. You've got Vancouver with Seattle, for example. You've got the couple of pods, obviously, down there in the south with Miami and Atlanta. In the north, you've got different pods as well. Central locations are very crucial. What you've got there is you've got a lot of cities that can really work together in hosting group games. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means obviously in the new format of a World Cup, 48 teams are coming in. We've got teams of three. Now, teams of three don't work. They're not ideal. It's going to be a difficult situation for FIFA to navigate over the next 4 years. A plays B, B plays C, when does C play A? Basically, you're looking at two stadiums to kind of look into that in one group and potentially two groups. So that's the other thing that was really against Edmonton, that Vancouver had Seattle. Who would Edmonton have had to pair up with? And I certainly think that played a massive part when you look at the 16 venues announced today, going with those 16 groups.
2026 may seem like forever away, but we know it is not. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. These host cities need to take advantage of that. So when it comes to the Canadian cities, KJ, in the venues in particular, what is it that they need to do to make sure they're ready for FIFA World Cup 2026?
Well, we know there's a lot of work to be done. Not only in the Canadian stadiums, by the way, in the United States stadiums as well, dominated by NFL stadiums that will need to be obviously widened. Capacity not necessarily going to be impacted by that. But FIFA are not going to be surprised here. You know, they've announced these cities knowing that these cities have signed on for the work that needs to happen. Now, we know obviously in Vancouver, work will need to be happening and all infrastructure around. Grass pitch will come in. That is a fabulous venue. You know, many of us were there. I certainly was broadcasting the 2015 Women's World Cup final. The sound in there, the fantastic atmosphere. I think amongst the stadiums in Canada, that is the least amount of work that needs to be done. Although, don't get my words wrong here. There's a lot of things that need to happen. In Toronto is going to be different, right? Because the way we look at BMO Field right now is a shadow of what it's going to look like in 2026. We know they must get over the 40,000 threshold. I would expect temporary stands to come on both sides. And then after that, they've got to make it look properly. You know, there's a stadium in Russia last year, in 2018, in Yekaterinburg, that had a stadium that looked like it just plonked onto the edge of the stadium. And I know that's been used as a reference point amongst people in Canadian soccer to say, that's not what we want it to look like. It's got to look like a stadium that doesn't look temporary. So lots of work to be done, lots of money to be spent. But as I said, FIFA have put that in there. They signed off on that, and they now know the work that needs to be put in for Toronto. Larry Tannenbaum, Bill Manning and his team, they deserve a lot of credit to get that one over the line.
We know the 2026 World Cup is going to be a massive undertaking. It's the first time ever that it's being hosted by 3 countries. And it's also the first time, KJ, that we're seeing it turn into a 48-team tournament. So logistically, how is this going to work?
Well, I think from the sporting point of view, Andy, it's a great point. And, somebody who loves the FIFA World Cup as much as I do, a bit of a historian, it's going to be very different. I don't think too many people are aware that this is going to be an extremely different World Cup. What we've got now is we've got more knockout games now than we had in previous World Cups from 1930 to 1954. More games knockout than you did in any of those games, in any of those tournaments. So, we're going to have a round of 32. What does that mean for Canada? Where do Canada base themselves? Speaking to Victor Montagliani, I think we can say that Canada are going to probably play both group games in the same city. And then maybe after that, the winner of that group or whoever finishes second is also partnered up with another Canadian city, maybe where they didn't play prior to that. So there's lots of factors within this. I don't think Canada will be playing in Toronto one group game and traveling across the city to play in Vancouver. I just can't see that happening. It will be a massive disadvantage for the hosts to do that. They will be seeded. They will be expected to get through that group. And that's another factor of this. But the fact that there's only 2 group games is a dramatic impact, particularly on the sporting side of this. And I think the way that we view it is that teams are going to be peaking as the tournament goes on. They still have to play 7 games to try and win this World Cup, but it's a dramatically different World Cup in terms of knockout games, meaning a lot right from the start, a round of 32 knockout games where it can be tight, and we could have a few more upsets as well.
KJ, you're rubbing shoulders with a lot of dignitaries who are in New York for this announcement. What have they been saying? What do they make of how these games have also been spread out through these 3 countries?
Well, you're right. It certainly was a star-studded occasion here. Nothing brings out the stars more than New York City, I suppose. And you can see so many people from different sports across North America really link themselves to this. I think that's very different, certainly to how I will remember it from 1994. 1994 was really the birth of soccer in this country. Now, soccer in this country is far from that. It's grown up and people are loving it. It's cool now to follow this sport. Lots of different people follow the sport all over the world, and lots of different sports stars follow it as well. So interesting to see so many people getting involved in that in the announcement. As for other news, I think it was quite telling that we haven't got a schedule yet. We haven't got a final host yet, but I think it was clear it was dropped certainly as a bit more of a hint in the press conference. And I certainly spoke to Victor Montagliani in my one-on-one you can watch later about this, that it's clear Canada will be playing on day 1 of the 2026 World Cup. Day 1 will include the 3 hosts, United States, Mexico, and Canada, all hosting games in the first matches of the 2026 World Cup. That is very, very important in a lot of regards. One, it's a celebration for Canada. They'll become the 19th different country to host a FIFA Men's World Cup. Very special for them. And also very telling that they will play the first game, because some people will say, well, how is that going to work? There's only 3 games. Will they play the first one and the second one, or will they play the first one and the third one? I think they would rather have the latter. But we've got a few more months to decide what's going to happen with the schedule and the different dates. But as for now, Andy, a very special and momentous day here for Canadian soccer in New York City.
Great stuff, KJ. Enjoy the rest of your time in New York. Big announcement. Cannot wait for FIFA World Cup 2026. Of course, the Canadian men already prepping for 2022. And more immediate right here on One Soccer's YouTube channel. We do have the CONCACAF U20 Championship. That begins June 18th. The Canadians taking on Cuba. This acts as a qualifier for their FIFA Under-20 World Cup. You've been watching One Soccer here on our YouTube channel. I'm Andi Petrillo, and we'll see you next time.